Alright, so today we're going to be going over conics still. This time our shape is a parabola. So rather than having it be the circle, we're now going to parabolas. And you first learned about parabolas in Math 2 when you were doing quadratics there. And you continued it in Math 3. So this should mostly be a review for you. If any part isn't, let me know so that way we can talk about it a little more. So we have two forms that we can write a parabola in. The first one is standard form, and the key thing with standard form, a cannot equal 0, because if a is 0, we don't even have a quadratic. So our first form, y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, that's your basic standard form for a parabola. The equation for your axis of symmetry, also sometimes known as line of symmetry, is x equals negative b over 2a. And then your vertex you find by taking that negative b over 2a and plugging it into your function. The graph of this parabola could look one of two ways. It can either look like this, going up, with that axis of symmetry being right down the middle, and your going right through your vertex, or it can be going downward. Again, with your axis of symmetry going right down the middle. Now the difference, A is positive, A is negative. So depending on what your A is, your graph can either go up or down. Okay, this is what you learned in Math 2. You just stuck with these vertical parabolas. In Math 3, you guys went and learned about horizontal as well. So the difference between vertical and horizontal, instead of a y equals a bunch of stuff with x, we have x equals a bunch of stuff with y. Your axis of symmetry is now y equals negative b over 2a. And your vertex is x, comma, negative b over 2a. You find it the same way where you plug negative b over 2a, whatever value you get, you plug it in for y and solve for x. So the graphs on these, if a is positive, will open to the right with your line of symmetry being horizontal, still going through your vertex though. That part doesn't change. If a is negative, it's going to go to the left. And so standard form is just one of the forms we can write a parabola in. We tend to use it not nearly as often as descriptive form, just because we like descriptive form better because it tells us a little bit more information more quickly. But if we need to do it from standard form, we can by using the formula for axis of symmetry to find our vertex, and then plugging it in to find the missing piece. The other form that I was talking about is descriptive form. So these ones, what we do to get here is we complete the square, much like we did in circles. Complete the square so that you get your vertex form. For the first one here, we read our vertex as HK, and your axis of symmetry is x equals h. For the horizontal, and that's still the same in how we tell if it's a y equals or an x equals. Y equals is vertical, x equals is horizontal. Our vertex is still HK, But notice how h and k are switched. So k is with y, h is now in the y spot. Okay, but it's still hk. And your axis of symmetry is now the horizontal line, y equals k. And again, that A tells us the same information. So if the absolute value of A is equal to 1, we call that a normal graph. Whether it be horizontal or vertical, we call it normal. If the absolute value of A is greater than 1, it's a narrow graph. So, whoops, that's supposed to be an absolute value, not a parenthesis. So as our coefficient of our x squared gets larger, our graph will get, some people say thinner, I say narrower, same thing. So you'll hear narrow or thin. And then if A, the absolute value of A is less than 1, so in other words it's a fraction between 0 and 1, your graph is going to get wide. And then we still have the, if A is positive, your graph is either going to go up or to the right, depending on the direction, if it's x or y. If A is negative, it's going to go down or to the left. So what A tells you is the same on both graphs, or both types of graphs. It's just how they're written, we get our information differently about vertex and axis of symmetry. Okay, the next thing to review about your parabolas is something called the focus and the directrix. So if we were to sketch, this is purely a sketch, no equation with it. Our parabola, we will always have our vertex, which we know is this point right here. Well, the definition, the formal definition of a parabola is all the points equidistant from a vertex and a focus. The focus is always the point that's inside your parabola. So if your parabola is to the right, it's going to be to the right. If your parabola is left, your focus will be left. If your parabola is up, it'll be up. If your parabola is down, it'll be down. So your parabola is always on the inside of your parabola. This distance between the vertex and the focus, we call that C. Now the directrix is a line outside of the parabola. This is called the directrix. And this distance between the vertex and your directrix is negative C. So it's the same distance, just an opposite, which is what the negative tells us. So if C was 1, the focus would be 1 up, the directrix would be 1 down. We do have a formula to help us figure out what C is, and that formula, C, is equal to 1 over 4 times A. And you can get the A from your equation, whether it be in descriptive or in standard. It's just this number right here. And so when we have a vertical graph like this, to find that ordered pair and to find that equation of the line, it's going to be y equals whatever your y value is plus or minus c, depending on the direction. So we're either going to add c to get to our directrix, or we're going to subtract c to get to our directrix. For our focus, the ordered pair is going to have the same x value, but it'll be, oops, I should just put h, but it'll be k plus or minus c, again depending on the direction of your parabola. And this is true whether it goes up or down. Now side to side, Same idea. So I'm sketching just another. We have our vertex and our axis of symmetry. So this time, since our graph is going this way, our focus will be on the inside. It'll have an ordered pair. This time, we're adding our C value, because this is still C, found the exact same way, to our X instead of Y, because we're moving in the X direction. And for our directrix, it's going to be not Y equals, X equals. Our H plus or minus C. So again, the plus minus is just to account for if we're going left or right, to keep it inside the parabola, or I'm sorry, the directrix outside the parabola. Okay, but how we find C is the same no matter what. Everything else is dependent upon the direction your parabola is going. So this is everything about a parabola in a nutshell. So what I do want to do before we call it quits on our notes is I want to do one example where we find all of this information and then graph it. And then the other thing, the second example I want to do is work backwards, writing an equation of a parabola, because those are the two things we're going to have to do. So, let's start with y equals negative x plus 2 squared plus 4. So we have to identify the vertex, the focus, the axis of symmetry, and the directrix. I just abbreviate that DIR. As well as sketch our graph. Okay, so because it's in descriptive form, we can quickly read our vertex from the equation, but the thing is we have to know if it's vertical or horizontal to know which one's H and which one's K. So because it's y equals, we know that it's a vertical. So that means this is H, this is K. So it'll be negative 2, 4. Now our focus, we have to find our C value. So C is equal to 1 over 4 times our A value. Well, our A value is right here. So in this case, it'll be negative 1. So negative 1/4 is our C. So if I go and I graph my vertex, so that was negative 2. There's our vertex. I'm going to go down 1/4, so not very far. That's going to be my focus. Now I went down because it said my C was negative, so that means I'm going to subtract it from my vertex. My directrix is going to be 1/4 higher. So I'm going the opposite. So opposite of negative 1/4 is positive 1/4. So when it comes to writing the ordered pair, this is a vertical parabola going down, in fact. So I'm going to keep my x the same, but I'm going to take 4 and subtract 1/4. So 4 minus 1/4 will give me 3 3/4. There's the ordered pair for my focus. For my directrix, I'm going to add 1/4. So it's going to be y equals 4 1/4, because I'm adding 1/4 to my k. My axis of symmetry will just be x equals h. So that would be x equals -2. And your axis of symmetry should go through your vertex and your focus. So this is plenty of information for us to be able to sketch our graph. So all I have to do now is, this is going to be normal, so I'm just going to kind of draw it as normal as possible, so not extra wide, not extra narrow, just normal, and you have your graph. Usually the part most people get confused about is knowing, do we go up or down for our focus and directrix? And my answer is, just look at the sign. If your C comes out as negative, that means your focus is going down. Focus is always the answer you get for C. Your directrix is always the answer you get that's opposite of C. So we are going to do another graphing one in class. We're actually going to graph a horizontal one, but we're going to do the same process. So that way, if you have any questions on either one, you will have seen both. Okay, the second half of this is writing equations of parabolas. So that's when we're given specific information, and we then need to work backwards to write the equation. So let's see. Let me find a good one. So for this one, we're going to write the equation. And we're going to be told that the vertex is 5, 4, and the focus is 2, 4. So the first thing I'm going to look at, what direction does my parabola go? Is it vertical or horizontal? So one of the things I usually like to do is I draw a little sketch just so that I can visually see the relationship between my vertex and my focus. So if I were to come over to the side, and again, this is just little, we're not doing the whole thing, 5, 4, so that's 5, 4. There's my vertex. Now 2, 4, 2, 4. There's my focus. Knowing that my focus has to be inside my parabola, it's going to go something like this. So that's telling me I have a horizontal parabola, specifically a negative parabola. So those are some things I'm just going to keep in my head so that I can check that I'm using the right equation. So because it's horizontal, I know that it's going to have to be x equals a times, y minus h plus, sorry, I did that wrong again. That should be a k. Y minus k plus h. This is my general form in descriptive, is I know I have to have a horizontal parabola. So right away, I know my h and k. It gives it to me right here. So I can already go x equals a times y minus 4 plus 5. Okay, so I'm almost there. I just need to find a now. So for a, we have to use this focus. So we have to look at what's the difference between f and v. That's our c value that we need to be able to find. Well, if our vertex was 5, 4 and f is 2, 4, how much did we have to do to go from 5 to 2? Because we're starting at our vertex, what did we have to do to go from that vertex value of x to the focus value of x? Well, subtract 5, we went -3. So I know my c value is -3. We're going to use that. So I know -3, c has to equal 1 over 4a. That's our formula for c. So if I put this over 1 and cross multiply, I'll get -12a equals 1. So a is equal to -1 over 12. Now that I know what A is, I can write that into my equation, and we have our final answer. So when it comes to writing the equations, it's all about knowing the relationships between the key points and the key features. So remembering that your vertex to focus is C, your vertex to directrix is negative C, and one thing we didn't really touch on, but if you were to look at your distance between the focus and the directrix, if you were to go from here all the way through the vertex to the directrix, that's 2C. Okay, it's 2 times whatever C was, it's that distance. So those are kind of the things that we're going to look at and try to use when working backwards, are those kind of relationships. So in class, we're going to definitely do another graph, and we're going to probably do about 2 or 3 writing equations, because sometimes that can be a little more difficult. I'm also going to talk about something called focal chord that I believe you guys learned last year. It's not something that's commonly used, but it does come up once in your homework, so we'll talk about that as well, just to make sure you know what to do for that.